Welcome to Explorations. Today we're going to be speaking with Seth Kahan, who's the author of Visionary Leadership, Getting Change Right, and Getting Innovation Right. In this first of a four-part conversation with Seth, we discover his history with the World Bank and how they were able to use the power of story to transform knowledge at the bank. In future segments of this same conversation, we'll be exploring issues around disruptive change, innovation, and how to use story as a visionary tool. So let's get to it. So Seth, welcome to Explorations. I am so happy to have you here. It has been a long time coming, and we're going to have some fun today, I think, talking about the power of story.
I think we are too. I'm really looking forward to it, Richard. Thank you for inviting me.
You know, in my introduction to you here, the piece that leads up, you know, I talk about the 3 books that you have written, and we'll get to those shortly, I hope. But when I first met you back in the 1990s, you were working at the World Bank, and you were sort of an odd animal there because you were a storyteller and a story performer. Tell me a little bit about how you discovered story and maybe how story discovered you and maybe got you into the bank.
Okay. I was an odd duck there. I remember once going to the HR place and taking a bunch of tests to figure out my next step in my career. And after I did, they said, you are not like anyone else who works here. And they said, the good news is that you can have extraordinary success, but you're going to need to find someone who's going to run interference for you if you're going to do that. And that's exactly what I did in all my jobs. And you know Steve Denning, and he was that man for me while I was working on knowledge management. But yeah, I was definitely an odd duck in that organization. And fortunately, storytelling became part of it. It was
how interesting that it led to that. But what led you to even go to the World Bank? I mean, really?
Well, what originally led me to go to the World Bank was I was looking for work.
Okay. Oh, you mean like survival, right?
But so let's come back to storytelling first. So storytelling, I was led to storytelling through an existential crisis in my life. I was really spiraling like these galaxies back here in my life. I was really having a hard time finding my place in the world. I felt very lost. And at that same time, Bill Moyers came on TV and interviewed Joseph Campbell. And man, it was like the portal back into meaning for me. There was so much that Joseph Campbell said that I spent many years after that reading his books, watching his videos, learning as much as I could. But I realized at that point that story was a lot bigger than I had thought it was. And in fact, I came to believe through my work at the bank, actually, that rationality is a subset of narrative. That the way that we, science, which I'm a firm believer in, is just one way to tell the story. There's a lot of other ways. And many of them are equally as valuable. They may not do the same things that science and rationality do, but that's the whole point. They do things that science and rationality can't do. And I started to look at narrative as the master code. It helped me with my search for meaning. It informed my spiritual search. And eventually I became a performance storyteller. I had done experimental theater before that, but I became so interested in storytelling that I morphed into a storyteller. I did a lot of really creative storytelling, including on stages here in Washington, D.C. and bars. I had a performance piece called Reverend Chaos that was a one-man show that was a story.
Anybody ever throw beer bottles at you?
No, I never got that. Was not an overnight sensation, though, I'll say that. So, never achieved fame as a result of it. But I have tremendous respect for story, for creating the internal consistency that really makes consciousness possible and professional achievement possible and cooperation in society possible. So story to me is a kind of holy grail in our world.
I
Just one
love
of
this idea that you just talked about that actually rationality is actually a subset of story.
absolutely,
I
yeah.
think that's a beautiful, beautiful, has an elegance to it.
Uh-huh. Yeah, there's little rules and stuff that rationality abides by that other things don't, right?
Mhm.
If you go into the dark forest and you're looking for an elf, it might not be rationality that helps you out there, but sometimes you really need that elf, and you're willing to let go of that rationality to make it safely on that journey.
Yeah, especially if you want the pot at the end of the rainbow,
That's right.
the pot of
That's right.
gold. So you joined the team at the World Bank,
I did.
and willy nilly found yourself working with Steve Denning. Steve had returned from his appointment in the Africa division to come back to the bank and was sort of lost and trying to figure out what he wanted to do. Where did you fit in to that part of his story?
So Steve was he was given the assignment of knowledge management, which at that point it was, as Steve would say, was like being sent to Siberia. Um, and he was actually looking into information overload, and from that he discovered knowledge management. I was working on the intranet, the internal internet at the World Bank, and this was in the mid 90s, 95. So the internet was not well understood, and my team was really a failure. We were an example of build it and they won't come. And I got frustrated with my team. So we had two groups in knowledge management. There was Steve and there was the technology people. And I was with the technology people, and I was turning in my resignation because I was fed up with these people. And Steve stopped by my office at that very moment when I was literally typing my resignation letter. And he said, "What are you doing?" And I told him, and he said, "Just give me half an hour." And the CIO at that point came to me, who was Steve's boss, and said, "I would like to reassign you to Steve Denning's group." He had no group. I think I was the first person in his group. But if I wasn't, I was the second. And I believed in this idea of knowledge management, that what we know is a bigger asset than how much money we have. And I wanted to understand how to harness it. And that's what Steve was all about. And he was not about the technology portion. I fit, and we started working together. I liked working with Steve. He's a great boss. And one day at the World Bank's country club, Bretton Woods, I was at a picnic, and I was telling stories to little kids, because at that point in my life, I had been doing performance storytelling for a number of years, and I loved it. So I had a bunch of little kids around me, and I was going off. And Steve was watching this, and a penny dropped for him, and he thought, boy, if we could harness this power, we could spread knowledge management throughout this organization so much faster than we are today. And we started talking about storytelling. And it was not long after that I came looking for you. Steve gave me my first assignment. Go find a storyteller who has experience working in organizations.
I think there were three of us in the whole universe at the time.
I don't doubt it. Fortunately for me, you were giving a presentation in Richmond for the YMCA, and Richmond's only 2 hours from DC. So I was literally able to hop in my car and come meet you all in a day's work.
I remember that day well. I thought, well, wonder what this is going to lead to.
Yeah.
And I think somewhere along the line, somewhere right after that, I was organizing an event at the International Storytelling Center on story and business. And I invited you and Steve to come, and you did. And I remember meeting Steve. He was just sort of such an unassuming kind of guy. And but he had a powerful idea, and he had a powerful story, which made him a very powerful person because of that. It was an interesting journey with you guys.
That's so true, what you just said, too. Steve is probably one of the most uncharismatic people I know, in terms of, animal magnetism and, all of that stuff that you traditionally associate with someone who, articulate, looks like Rock Hudson and can, that's not Steve. Steve is a lawyer from Australia, who works actually from Wales, I guess, not from Australia. I'm trying to remember. But anyways, he's the opposite of your typical charismatic leader. And he had two things that you just said: a powerful idea, and he harnessed the power of story. And those two things, he was able to create $60 million a year worth of change in just 2 years at the World Bank. That's how fast our initiative grew. from 0 to 60 million a year in 2 years.
Yeah, it was impressive. And you guys together, you formulated this idea of a springboard story, which was a story that would engage people in a very sort of almost like a Trojan horse kind of way,
Hmm.
to get involved with an idea for change. And that was, I'm still talking about that 30 years from since. I still
Yeah, yeah.
share that with people because I think it's such an incredible story form.
Yeah, I teach it to people regularly. It is a very powerful form. And the ultimate springboard story kind of metaphor for me as I go is to like Tupperware parties, right? You want to spark people to action. You want them to buy their kit and start selling Tupperware or Herbalife or Amway or whatever one you pick. And, people get up and tell true stories about how much money they're making that can be validated when they're not around. And people buy those kits and start selling.
Yeah.
That's sparking action. And that's,
Yeah.
we want to do a very different kind of action, but we still use the same format.